Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well in the snow, and I want to talk with you today about Vygotsky's theory of cognitive development. Vygotsky is super important for us as teacher because we build off of Vygotsky. What we created from him is our view of constructivism, which we'll talk about in our next class. And I'll be giving you that material to prepare for class next week. But before we can really talk in depth about constructivism, we have to look at the theorist who's really behind that, and that is Vygotsky. So, I would like you to meet my friend Lev Vygotsky, whose name is fun to say. He was a Russian psychologist, and he worked in post-revolutionary Soviet Union, and his goal was to build psychology along Marxist lines. And as he did that work, he began to look at educational psychology because he felt that the best way to promote the Marxist thought that was being promoted in what was Russia, which was the Soviet Union in those days, was to create a learning system where children learned not only Marxist theory but learned other material as well, reading, writing, and math, that kind of thing. So Vygotsky starts out as a psychologist, but then he really becomes focused on educational psychology and the psychology behind learning. So he conducted his research and his writing at the same time as Piaget, but his research was banned. He was considered an enemy of the state, and his writing was not made available to anyone in Russia or in the West until the 60s. And he died of tuberculosis at the age of 38. So he lives a very short life, but he made this huge impact. So for 20 years after his death, Vygotsky's work was banned by Stalin, and Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union from the late 20s, early 30s until 1953. And so what happens is that after Stalin dies in 53, Vygotsky's work begins to get rediscovered as school systems. It's after World War II. School systems are growing in the Soviet Union, and they're looking for effective learning models. And so Vygotsky's work begins to be researched and reviewed and becomes available to Western researchers as well. And the system that you and I were taught under is really based off of Vygotsky's work. So Vygotsky says that Piaget is great, but that Piaget really only looked at learning as developing and cognitive development as being something that is individual and alone and does not have the kind of social impact it should have, the kind of social influence. And Vygotsky says that we are really, as individual learners, much more dependent on the tools in our world and by tools we mean things like people as well as things like pens, papers, computers, or the symbols like language and math systems. So we have to really look at these two things, that learning is dependent on the interaction between the tools that we use and the people who are part of our lives, and who are teaching us. Usually teachers, but not always teachers. Sometimes learning can occur because of our parents or other caregivers or even our peers. And we'll talk about that a little bit more right now. So there are a few big ideas under Vygotsky. So the first one is this idea of guided participation. He says that things are taught rather than discovered. So we are taught to read, we are taught to write, we are taught to do mathematics. And so you'll see that this theory will be, this corner of Vygotsky's theory is going to be challenged later on by the constructivists. And it will develop further. The idea that, so this is just an aside, we start looking at that children can learn and have a greater ability to learn on their own than we've probably given them credit for. But back to Vygotsky. Vygotsky says we have to share this road and share the thinking load. He says that not that children are novice learners, and that what we have to do as teachers is help them learn complex tasks, like learning to read. Learning to read is a very complex task. We have to decipher the symbols that are on the page, turn them into sounds, then turn them into words, compose them into chunks of ideas, sentences, and then larger chunks of ideas, which are paragraphs, and understand not only how to read the words, but to make sense of what they are saying, have comprehension. And so he says that this assistance can be both physical, where we are pointing out what words are and helping children form letters and understand what sounds, what the sound of a letter means and what the sound of a word means, and that can come from adults and from peers. And so this is guided participation. The second part of this, and it's part of guided participation, is scaffolding. And scaffolding is super important. We use this term all the time in learning, and we use it from pre-K all the way through to university. And I want to talk about that for just a minute now. So scaffolding is based on this idea. You see here this scaffold, right? So if you think about a scaffolding when you look at a building, why do we use scaffolding when we build a building? Well, we need it because we need supports. And once the building is built, do we keep the scaffolding up? No, right? We take the scaffolding down. It's the same thing with learning. So the idea is that in scaffolding, the teacher plays a role, right? Whether it's working in small groups, working one-on-one with a child. Here you see a teacher who maybe is teaching a child how to cut, how to use scissors, or you see a teacher working with a large group. These are all different types of scaffolding. So scaffolding can be one-on-one, but it can also be group-based. But then also we see here that this also is scaffolding. We see this child supporting the other child and giving maybe feedback or input into what is being written. Here we have children interpreting what they're seeing on a computer screen together. That feedback, that give and take that occurs is also considered scaffolding, increasing learning by giving support so that the child interprets and creates material because they have gotten this support. Now, the next part of Vygotsky, the next big idea that is so important, is that Vygotsky takes scaffolding and says that when I'm talking about scaffolding, we're really talking about this theory of the zone of proximal development. And that zone of proximal development is the distance between where a learner is at developmentally on their own and where a learner could be with the help of the more knowledgeable other. The more knowledgeable other is a parent, a teacher, a peer, another child in the classroom. So that more knowledgeable other there are a lot of people that can fit into that spot. So that knowledgeable other scaffolds the learning for the child so that what a learner can do unaided is here in the center. We're looking to get to that bullseye. We are out here when what the learner cannot do. And this is the zone of proximal development. So, for example, when I wanted to learn how to knit years ago from Grandma Ingle, and so I couldn't do it unaided. I knew that there was yarn, I knew that there were needles, that was about it. I couldn't read a pattern or make a sweater or anything. And so I wanted to get to this point, but I was here. I couldn't do it. And what Grandma Ingle did was she gave me yarn, she gave me needles, so she gave me some tools, right? And then she taught me very slowly just how to do a knit stitch. And I did lots and lots of rows of knit stitches and made very ugly scarves for a while. And then slowly we worked through this zone of proximal development so that now I can teach my children how to knit, and I help out when other people need help in knitting. And so that process, all right, for something as just personal as learning how to knit is here. Now think about how we do it when we want to learn something like how to do how to be able to count to 100. So when a child comes in to kindergarten, they maybe cannot count to 100, but in kindergarten, the teacher will work with the children and have them practice counting out loud, give them counting charts, give them the tools they need so that the child leaves kindergarten to go to first grade and can count to 100. And then we know that the first grade teacher then is going to take the child and teach them how to take those numbers and begin to add up to 20 so that they'll learn how to count by tens and add by tens, count by fives and add by fives. And then that child goes from being able to do addition and subtraction to going back here to this back here when we want to teach them how to do multiplication. So it's a continual process, and that's the way Vygotsky saw learning that happens in the classroom, that there is this constant process. Some children need more supports, some children need less supports. If you think about yourself, there are areas where you excelled, areas where you needed extra help from your teacher. Maybe you worked with a peer tutor. Sometimes that's a formalized relationship. Sometimes it's just that you have your friend or a sibling help you with your homework. So Vygotsky is really the first person that really gives us a theoretical concept to grab a hold of and really look at this type of learning. So for example, here's an example of this type of guided participation through the zone of proximal development. A mother sits with her toddler, they sing Ba Ba Black Sheep, and then the mother sings Ba Ba Black Sheep, have you any? Well, oh, I'm so sorry about my singing. And when the mother pauses, the child sings 3 bags full. So how is this guided participation? Well, the mother repeats this song over and over. She gives the child the tool of language, and then that tool is then used to have the child be able to complete the song. And the child will then learn the song and know the song. The same thing happens when we do problem solving, when we guide children through the process of learning how to solve a problem. So in this example, the little girl can't find her toy. The father guides her through a series of questions. Where did you last see it? Can you remember? Was it in the car? Was it outside? And then when he asks her, was it in the car? And she says, I don't know, maybe it is. And then she goes and finds the toy. So the father helps her not only find her toy, but really what he helps her learn how to do is problem solving. This is an authentic learning experience, and the child remembers this. She knows now how to solve a problem. When you think about your own driver's ed experience, how were you taught how to drive? Many of you were probably taught at first by a parent or maybe an older sibling or a family member who guided you through that. Maybe let you drive in a parking lot or back up out of the driveway. I hated teaching my daughters how to drive and handed that one over to Mr. Engel because I didn't really like it. But when you were learning, you maybe learned from a family member at home and then through driver's ed. All that scaffolding that happened before you were allowed to take all of our lives into your hands and drive on the highway had to happen through a process of scaffolding. So this is Vygotsky. He emphasizes social learning. He emphasizes this zone of proximal development, and he pushes for an authentic learning experience. You learn how to drive not with a computer game, not just by sitting in a classroom, but by learning how to drive on the highway. I'm going to pause right here, and I'm going to finish this up on a very brief second video.